Hi, thank you very much for joining this discussion around individualized learning. How can learning, teaching be personalized, customized to children, to people wanting to learn new skills? It's a privilege for me to be joined by four amazing people, experts in education who have been are shaping education as it is approached today. My name is Alban. I'm working at London & Partners, which is a promotional agency for London. We support people wanting to visit, create events in London, as well as businesses. Please do come and talk to us if you want to know more. But without further ado, I'd like to go around the virtual room and introduce these four amazing panelists, as I was saying, experts in education. And I will let them introduce themselves, as they will do a much better job than I would. And probably ladies first, I'll go to Priya. Priya, would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself, your journey in education, and what drives you, what is making you wake up in the morning and work in education?
Sure. So I'm Priya. I'm the founder and chief executive of Century Tech. What gets me up in the morning to do what I do is, unfortunately, in a sense, it's necessity. I came up with this this idea that's not new at all. That we just need a personalised education for every child. Every child deserves one. Every teacher actually attempts to give every child one every single day. Let's not forget that. But teachers are not given the tools to do what they are asked to do every single day, and they really struggle. So 8 years ago, I learned that 74% of teachers wanted to quit their jobs in the next 3 years. That number's gone up to 82%. If the devil's in the detail, when you look into that detail, teachers are saying they spend more than half of their time, 60% of their time, micro-marking, micro-assessing, trying to figure out where's the point of need. By the time they figured that out, it's too late. Parents' evenings take place once or twice a year. Parents don't really know when or how to intervene for the child. And then if you look at the one-size-fits-all delivery of education that we've all become so used to, actually that's inadequate. And so when we looked at that and thought, looked at essentially the global education crisis, and we saw technology transforming every single sector in the world, people are able to make far more accurate, speedy decisions in every other sector. We just thought, okay, well, where's that in education? I happened to be an advisor to government at the time, had no intention of starting a tech company, which then explains the necessity of how the technology just simply didn't exist in the education sector that could really, truly transform teaching and learning and augment teaching and learning. So it doesn't replace it. And so the idea was how can we use artificial intelligence, create that personalized education? How can we use big data analysis to pinpoint, and give the deep insights to educators at the time of need? And because it didn't exist, and because it simply wasn't the time to go through a procurement process through government and find some big company that wasn't agile or innovative enough to build it quickly enough, I decided to, and I've got 2 kids, and I'm very much hoping that not only do they use our technology now, but I'm hoping that we can also change the assessment landscape for them.
That is very nice and a very, very nice vision. I like it, and a good mission. Thanks a lot, Priya. Jim, would you like to go next? And I'll go probably to Mark and Henry.
Hi, it's great to join you and to join this group of people. I'm a member of the House of Lords, so a policymaker. I was once, many moons ago, over 10 years ago, the schools minister for 3 years for this country. And I now advise and consult for, and I'm a non-exec for various education and education technology businesses. I also chair EACT, which is a multi-academy trust of some 28 schools. And I guess, what gets me up in the morning and keeps me interested in education, and has done since Tony Blair asked me to be schools minister in 2006, is, I suppose, it's a sense of the possibility of it, and that there's no easy answers. It's not an exact science. There's no silver bullet, because it's a profoundly human endeavor. Every human is different, both teachers and pupils, and marrying that up is really difficult, which is why, as Priya's just said, AI is such a powerful potential tool. There's so much more potential still to be realized with it in really helping teachers. But but profoundly, at the end of the day, we've got to build a better humanity. We've got to be more sustainable as a planet. We've got to be able to compete effectively as humans with technology. Otherwise, we have no economic future as individuals. And so nurturing the talents and the rounded skills and talents of children, not just the exam passing talents, is a real passion of mine. And ultimately, giving them a sense of power over change. The most disadvantaged people in our country and in our world are those who have to endure life. Those of us with advantage don't have to endure so much because we can change more about what goes on in our lives, and I want everyone to have that. And that's fundamentally what means that I do the pro bono work that I do in education.
That's nice, and power to change is definitely something that resonates. Mark, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Hornis. I run Quarto Studios. We're a games company. We've been running for about 10 years now. I think we've been in this market and exploring how best to engage learners in their journey. And for me, what gets me up and running, deeply personal for me. I grew up at a time when dyslexia wasn't really known about in schools, so I was probably referred to as disruptive, or it was incredibly stressful for me. School, I learned to read through comics, so it was what I was engaged with. So I've always been intrigued by how you engage and how you entertain at the same time, and how you go where the learner is to help them facilitate their own learning. And so over the 10 years, we've explored all sorts of things, all different ways of using games, we started out as an AI company, interesting enough, Priya, which is we worked with the Stanford Research Institute, who gave us their next version of Siri, but we weren't smart enough to utilize that, so we moved in a different direction. But that's been, for me, that's what it's all about. It's how to use data, how to use play, and how to use engagement and entertainment to just make learning more fun, to make it feel like, that enthusiasm you feel when you're 5 years old and you run home with a painted picture of a rocket. You don't care about the grades, you don't care about anything, you care about the achievement. And I want that to stay with people all the way through. I think it's really important.
Making learning fun, I think that will be music to a lot of children's ears. Thanks, Mark. Henry, last but not least.
Thank you. So yes, hi everyone, my name is Henry. I am the Learning Experience Manager at Upskill Digital. So we're an organisation that is, as the name kind of says on the tin, focused on digital skills training. We do a lot UK-wide, which focuses on developing the skills within schools of students and their overall kind of career and employability. We do a lot with teachers to kind of develop their digital skills and their knowledge around the digital skills gap, so that we can look to address that in the best way possible. We run a lot of CSR programs, such as the Google Digital Garage, Lloyds Bank Academy, etc., which are really looking to drive kind of change across the UK for a range of people, whether it's individuals looking to develop their skills and secure meaningful employment, or to look to enhance their skill sets to run their own businesses. So we're really, really passionate about the role of tech and advocates for developing those skills and ensuring that everybody can access digital, no matter their background, age, etc., really equipping them with the skills. We also do a lot within the D&I space to really kind of level the playing field there. We look a lot around topics like allyship, advocacy, etc., bias and their roles. So we do a lot across the kind of training spectrum. I think from my personal kind of background, what really gets me up in the morning is that idea of leveling the playing field. I have quite a posh sounding accent, which I don't really know how that's come about, because my dad's from Liverpool and my mum's from Birmingham, which are probably two of the strongest accents in the UK. I'm from a working class town called Crawley. I went to a state school there. Some have ended up with this accent, but I don't know how. But for me, education was always kind of a route to improvement and self-development, and to really, you know, take advantage of that. And my parents very much instilled in me that desire to kind of improve my situation and myself through education. And I think that idea of leveling the playing field, enabling everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their socioeconomic situation, is what really kind of drives me. And it's something we're doing a lot of at the moment, with the skills boot camps run by the Department for Education, with their plan for jobs, looking very much at NEET students and those who are kind of disengaged with the education system. And I think that levelling of the playing field is so critical when it comes to this training. And that's ultimately really, you know, driven by personalisation, when we really tap into what motivates people, the way that they learn, the futures they want to build for themselves, and we equip them with that power and that autonomy. I think that's when we see the best learning and the best engagement. So, you know, that is ultimately what we're trying to do, and level the playing field so that everybody, whether you get a C or an A or whatever, is able to really, you know, pursue meaningful opportunities and achieve their desired futures.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Henry, and thank you to all the panelists for joining us. It's truly humbling to be in a virtual room with such inspiring people working hard in the education industry. So thanks for that. All day today is about future of education. So we'll focus on that future, what the future has in store for us. So let's evacuate the subject straight away. Let's talk about quickly the last 18 months. I feel that we've talked already too much about it, but I'd like to get your perspective on that last year and challenges, opportunities it has presented for you and your business or your activity, the challenges and the changes you've seen in the industry. Don't have to go on for too long, but briefly your view on it. And probably I'll start with Jim, with your obviously many hats and experience in the industry. How have you seen those last 18 months in the education industry?
Well, it's been a huge challenge, and yeah, the teaching workforce has largely risen to that challenge in an extraordinary way. You know, the vast majority have not been trained to use technology. They've not been trained in any kind of pedagogy to teach online, and they've been able to do that really quickly. It's really interesting that it's shown that they can change really quickly when they have to, and that gives me optimism for a future. We've seen an adoption of technology that's been rapidly accelerated by COVID, and that's also exciting. And I think there's a permanent adoption. You know, talking to the Secretary of State back in June, July time, you know, he said that big investment in devices, £300 million worth of devices gone out to schools and to disadvantaged pupils. That's not just a sticking plaster. He wants a return on that investment over many years. So that's exciting. But at the same time, there's been a struggle to keep it human. And so we have a big well-being issue that, you know, there was a massive mental health crisis for children as we went into the pandemic. It's only accelerated. We've seen the gap between the most advantaged and the most disadvantaged widen during COVID. So it's also shone a light on some of the problems that were pre-existing, as well as shown us that there are some opportunities that we can really take forward in the future, and that is exciting if the commercial opportunity gets close enough to the real need in the classroom, and we can marry that together, then I think we can do really good things.
Thanks for that. Probably going to Mark around the gaming side of things. How's the last year been for you?
So it's been interesting. Interesting enough, from a work perspective, it has made no difference for us. But from engaging with users, so one of the very first things, as Jim said, children's well-being and I don't think that was looked at enough earlier on during the pandemic. So we released a free app to help children to monitor their own moods and to monitor their own behavior, and then suggest ways to go around it. And we worked with a lot of children psychologists to kind of help them with that. But I think for us, one of the biggest changes, apart from how the teachers have risen to the challenge and how technology has been adopted, is also how the parents were almost thrust into a role where they became the teacher at home. And I think they got a new appreciation for the work that goes on in the classroom. I think they were, and it was hard because you have people that still had to work. It's incredibly challenging, but there's an area there where I feel that parents became more involved or aware of their child's education and still want to be a part of that. And now that we've got classrooms starting up again, it's almost like we've got this whole workforce of teachers or part-time teachers in the parents that don't know how to keep engaged, which is something that we've found a lot with the parents that we've engaged, we talked with. So that's something that I think we're going to look at going forward. But definitely the landscape has changed. Devices, parents' approach to screens has changed. They're not the demons that they were at the beginning of lockdown. There is a potential in utilizing that learning, and that new understanding to bring learning to children. It's just how we take advantage of this now. And I hate to say the word advantage, but there is a pause. There is a moment where it's sort of silent on the battlefield where we can kind of make some meaningful change right now. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Henry, obviously working closely with the team at Upskill Digital. I know you guys have been very busy in the last year, but how's it been for you?
Yeah, so I know you've spoke, as you said slightly earlier, with Gori, our CEO, so I won't say anything that'll get me in trouble, but we have been very busy. It has been a very, very busy time. We've seen, obviously, the biggest change in terms of a lack of face-to-face interaction really changed the whole way that we run sessions, with young people, but also with some of the programs that we run with adult learners. So, we have pivoted everything online. I think initially that was, a successful kind of move, but obviously you then see things like Zoom fatigue, etc., creeping in. So I think we've really seen a need throughout this to not only kind of solve the problem, but to also then build upon it and actually create experiences online, which are probably the most visual, the most technologically advanced that have been for a long while in terms of the experiences that we create. So we've seen not only a shift, but then actually a kind of innovation and a real kind of adoption of technology and tools like AR and VR, more immersive experiences, ways of thinking about learning, which I think are exciting to take into the future. Things like creating of escape room-esque models, for example, and it kind of links, I guess, to some of the gamification that you do, Mark, but in terms of actually causing learners to go into a situation and figure out problems and solutions themselves rather than giving them the answers, which was potentially done before in order to get through curriculums as well. But I think aside from that obvious kind of adoption of technology, we have seen, and I know Jim kind of mentioned it in terms of some of the divide element. Obviously, there's been a digital divide, and I know there's been a lot of work to address equipment, but there's also been, kind of access to internet, adapting resources in order to be optimized for mobile and to work on those devices. Like you said as well, Jim, actually staff and their knowledge of these tools and their comfort and confidence in administrating them, we've seen a real need for training on. And I think, obviously there's a lot of great solutions out there that enable students to track their progress, get immediate feedback, replicate the classroom, but online. But with that, there does come other challenges in terms of cyberbullying, the fact that they're online a lot more, and the risks that exist there. So we have seen obviously that adoption of digital, but a bit of a kind of problem or a barrier to get over to ensure it's adopted by all, and rather than a few. But I think from a learning side of things as well, apart from the innovation of the experience, we have seen a lot more kind of emphasis on elements of social learning as well. So really creating spaces for peer-to-peer and community learning, which I think is exciting. Kind of discussions and forums online. So I think that's been something that we have seen, and I think also that blended approach utilizing online systems, whether it's learning management solutions or it's learning experience platforms, but somewhere that houses a mixture of asynchronous content and then the live delivery, which I think moving forward will be a really exciting opportunity for students to individualize their learning experience, to gain more immediate feedback, to be tracking their progress, to be able to set goals. And I think whilst there have been some challenges, there's also been some exciting developments that hopefully we can harness as we move forward, because I think it will create a much more rounded learning experience.
You're absolutely right. Thanks for that. Henry. And finally, Priya, you and I had a couple of chats across the last 18 months, but give us your perspective on things for Century, but also more broadly around what you've seen happening in that period.
So, we were thrown into the world on the lack of infrastructure, the lack of hardware, particularly in communities where there are disadvantaged students. Laptops were being distributed, but slowly. Is there a plan of keeping that up, of then replacing the hardware when it's old? Are we preparing for the next time that we experience something like this? And these are all really, really big questions that we've seen over the last 18 months, and we've had going forward. Then we haven't really learned our lesson, and we're going to make the same mistakes going forward. At Century, we grew over 400%. We were serving schools and students in countries which we hadn't planned on, going to for another 5 years. Instead of training 5 teachers a day, we trained 500 in an hour using online technology ourselves. So in a really, really positive way. We saw the challenges in change management in schools, but we also saw how educators were then embracing AI and technology. They were starting to learn about AI because there's technology in schools, but there's a very big difference between these advanced technologies and the sort of standard learning management system, standard homework app, standard kind of rules-based system. They started to see the benefits. They started to see personalized education. They started to see how big data can benefit them. They started to ask questions about the ethics, which is absolutely right, questions about the data, going beyond GDPR. What are companies doing with this data? And that's really, really positive, because the only way that we will solve the problems to do with ethics and where data is held, stored, how it's processed is actually if we educate the public and they ask the right questions. We had the exams debacle. So Alban, at the end of the day, algorithm was a big term that was used in the United Kingdom. We saw the United Kingdom react to that, and how some ill-defined algorithm was then used, and how that would then discriminate against students. That educated the public in some way, but potentially took us a little bit backwards when it came to how we use data in potentially very positive ways. We're now seeing, it's quite divided in terms of the technology use over the last 18 months. So what we're at present seeing now that schools are going back is that some are saying, well, I saw it, I used it, I can use it now that we're not in lockdown. Let me now use it in a positive way, which is fantastic. But others are saying, well, we used it really positively. It was great, but I have fatigue, digital fatigue. I don't want any digital. But parents don't want digital. They've had screens for too long. And actually, the right approach is when you see there's a blend, right? This technology augments the human interaction between the students and the teachers. It's not there to replace it in a sense as to how, in a way, what it did in the last 18 months. So the blend is the right approach. So where we go, when we come to that blend and when we see that, that'll be a really positive time. Lastly, investment in EdTech has really changed. So prior to the pandemic, there were many venture capitalists, private equity that were pretty much allergic to EdTech, right? EdTech hasn't seen the sort of investment that health tech, for example, is seen. We're falling far behind, even though the UK punches above its weight. So, the EU and the UK combined in the last year had, less than £1 billion investment in terms of EdTech VC. US, India, both over 2 billion each in the last year. China over 10 billion. So the thing is, we need to see more here, right? There's clearly more that we can do. These investors saw at home themselves with their own children how EdTech can have a really positive impact, how AI in education has a positive impact. So I think there's still a long way to go in terms of investment, but we have definitely in the last 18 months seen much more of an appetite, and you're going to see, I think, a slow avalanche when it comes to EdTech investment, which I think is really positive. And now you're going to start to see lots of impact studies. We just got to ensure that the impact studies are ones that blend with innovative companies, right? Because traditional impact studies in education and healthcare, they are very important. I'm not saying they're not, but they don't tend to sort of go hand in hand and marry well with innovation. So we need to find ways of demonstrating that impact. But all in all, for education, and it was obviously teachers did an amazing job. They're all heroes. For EdTech, there are lots of positives that we can see in the last 18 months, but we just must make sure we learn those lessons on infrastructure and hardware. If we don't, we will increase the digital divide, and that's a terrible place to be in.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really interesting. And as kids are going back to school at the moment, we're hearing a lot and reading a lot about that back to normal type of things. But I think yeah, what do we define as normal, and how the normal classroom will evolve for kids will be quite interesting. Right, so moving on to the main topic for us today around individualized learning. Obviously, there's a big trend today in conception around personalization, customization, but how does it apply to learning, and how do we define individualized learning? So I'd quite like to hear your point of view about what is a tailored approach to learning, and how does it differentiate from traditional learning, and how can technology help with that? Because you obviously all have technology impacted jobs. So it'd be quite interesting to hear from that. And probably I'll stay with you, Priya, just because doing a bit of research for that event, I realized I think personalized or personalization is one of the first words in bold on your website as you open your webpage. So I'm assuming it's quite important for you. So tell us a bit more about your vision on individualized learning.
Yeah, sure. So, well, it's what we set out to do. It's to provide every student with a really individualized, learning experience. To provide every teacher with the information they need at the point in time, so that they can make those timely, targeted interventions. And then that's what Century's purpose is. But when we say how do we define individualized learning, it's a really easy question with a really simple answer. For all the audience that are viewing this, well, what do you want for yourself, and what do you want for your child? When they're learning anything, when you're learning anything, when we talk about lifelong learning, do you want a one size fits all, or do you want something that really understands your needs, your skills gaps, your pace of learning, your difficulty levels? A colleague on this call was talking about dyslexia, and how does that then cater for a student who's dyslexic? And some of these special needs, obviously there are huge spectrums, and children are different. It's not a one size fits all brush that approach either. So individualized learning is what do we want, and frankly what do we deserve when we're trying to ingest any sort of content, right? Education is not actually, obviously, as we know, and I think, but we have to constantly remind I think some of this, it's not just a transfer of information from textbook into brain, right, and turning that into knowledge. Education is much bigger than that. What a school provides is so much more complicated and important, the pastoral care for every student. So when we talk about individualized learning, though, and stick with that piece, well, we all deserve something that can follow what our needs are. It can also potentially motivate us and encourage us. If you think about opportunity as well, this is a really important point. Some children will have the world of opportunity at their feet, won't they? Just because of maybe where they were born, which postcode they were born in, who their parents are. Others may need a little bit extra sort of given to them, so that they can understand what the world of opportunity is. So when we talk about this, it's about that personalisation, and it's about no child ever being left behind. Now, the technology is not the only answer. That's the thing. It's not a magic bullet. So individualised learning is about trying to think about HI, human intelligence, right, and AI, artificial intelligence, and actually empowering the HI relationship between the student and the educator, and then ensure it, we're just using technology simply as a tool, just like we use any tool, like we use a pencil or a pen, to help augment that relationship, support it, superpower it. And so, that's what I want for my kids. It's what I want for me. I'm constantly learning about all sorts of different things and applying that, to my work, or, just to how I live my life. That's what it's all about. And then if we can achieve that individualized learning, that true learning, we're not going to have enough teachers to be able to do this one-to-one. Okay, firstly, we don't have the number of teachers now to be able to do this. And we're going to have 2 billion more learners by 2050. So, unless there's some magic tool to try and turn a lot more people into teachers, we're going to have to try and rely on some sort of technology to be able to do that. But what it should also be doing on that individualized learning is giving teachers, educators, and students the time to be able to focus on those other things that I talked about in education, because it's not just about what's in the curriculum, right? And actually, that's a whole other question for a whole other time, which is it right? Are we teaching people the right things, etc., etc.? But for me, individualized learning is, again, it's very simple. What do you want? What do you think your children deserve? And can we use technology to augment the teaching and learning process to provide it?
What children deserve, I've written that down because it's actually the point of it all. Is what do they deserve more than anything else? Thanks for that. And probably whilst we're on that macro vision and that you brought up, Priya, Jim, probably the right time to come to you around that question of individualized learning. How would you define it? Anything Priya said that resonate with you?
Everything Priya said resonated with me. Yeah, it's hard to argue with any of that. I mean, we know, where Priya finished, we know there's a big workload challenge for teachers, and technology can really help and release them and release their time. It can help them with the task of learning and being able to wrap learning around individuals. That's in the end what I'd like to be able to see. We have a system where we kind of get kids to arrive at a particular time and go to and change lessons at particular times. And one of the things that we saw in the pandemic was the flex of time and space for learning, and that where the technology was managed really well by schools and teachers, it just allowed for those that wanted to get up early and get on with their learning, so that they then had the afternoon free to do something else. They could do that. Those that wanted to go at a different pace to others, they could do that, and you could wrap the learning around them. That's what we'd like to be able to see, but it's a massive workload challenge. So technology can, one of the other companies that I advise are TES. They don't do much around the actual learning in the classroom and the actual business of teaching and learning. They do a whole bunch of stuff around workflow and around taking work away, and they've got some AI around classroom behavior and so on. All of that is really helpful in taking workload away and just freeing up the human-to-human interaction that fundamentally is the business of teaching. I think it will shift as we adopt technology more profoundly. The role of the teacher and what it looks like to do that human to human will shift, because it'll be less about the imparting of knowledge. In my vision anyway, there'll be others who argue with me about this. Be less about that, and it'll be more about really engaging, really understanding each individual child in their charge and what turns them on, what motivates them. When do you use the tool of technology? When do you use the tool of the pen and paper? When do you use the tool of the outdoors? These are all valid. They're all really important tools in the armory of a teacher, but we have to be able to free them up to work out for each individual how they're going to be able to use that. And they can be advised by dashboards and so on and so forth that technology can then probably provide for them.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point. And whilst we're talking about engaging with children, Mark, it's probably your main concern, I would guess, when you're building games for children, is how do you engage with them, and how do you make that fun, interactive, whilst the learning for them?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's earlier on someone said that our company does gamification, and I always rally against that term. I feel that when that term comes up, what that's doing is trying to take something boring and putting some stars on it and saying here's an achievement. And internally we have our own hideous term, which I won't refer here, but we try to bring learning to the content. So it's about a child not doing a driving game and then stopping and doing a bit of maths to go up a gear. It's about teaching them and creating environments where they can explore learning and model learning patterns on that. So if you have a piece of engagement, a content that's engaging, and you can constantly change the data under it, a child could swing through New York playing Spider-Man, but you can see different language in there. It could change. All games have a difficulty system that balances and changes anyway with the user as they go through. But learning doesn't. Learning just gets harder, which is a weird thing. It's like, well, I did this and I did it well, so now here's something tougher for you. Here's something tougher, which stops the enjoyment. It's kind of like if you were trying to read a book and you read it just slightly faster and it got quicker and quicker and quicker. That makes it more challenging, but it doesn't make it more fun. And so I want them to be able to explore content. And one of the things we're very focused on, particularly with children, is, like I say, language, is how in this new day and age, with them being bombarded with so much information, so much fake news, so much out of context information, how do they know what is real and what isn't? And when you're going to go to individualized learning and we're going to expose them to so much more content, how does that content be created? How does it get standardized? How does it become engaging? How is it the real thing rather than them walking away and saying, well, you know, I learned this and it was wrong. And I agree completely with everything that Priya has said and Jim said, particularly with how technology can free up teachers. I think it's incredibly important. I have met teachers who have cupboards full of tech innovations that weren't supported after the fact. So many robot turtles, so many things for coding in their cupboards, but they're one shot. They're not support, and support for the parent and the teacher to help guide their learner. Yeah, and for the learner themselves is really important. And I think we saw that. The pandemic threw a whole lot of people into disarray. Teachers stepped up amazingly. Parents stepped in as well. But I think that it is a sustained approach. It is an approach that if we're going to move down this, we have to look across. When we say leveling the playing field, you know, that's all goes all the way back down to childcare. This is it's a ground up solution to get to a point where individualized learning is able. But from our point of view, people in this room, tech absolutely can drive it. Tech absolutely is the answer to enabling it. Digestible data that is convenient for the parent and teacher to use is important. And that engaging content will keep the kid there and make them want to keep learning. I don't want a child, as Jim said, they get up early to do all their classwork, but I don't want them to free their afternoon up just to go and play a computer game. I'd like them to continue the learning journey in some form or other. So that's.
You're absolutely right, and the support to all that learning environment, I think, is also key. It's not just providing solutions, which I think was something you said was quite nice. Henry. Job title is obviously learning experience manager, so I'm guessing individualized learning is something you think about pretty much every day. So how does it apply to Upskills Digital? How do you think about it in your daytime job?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think obviously agree with everything that's been said by the previous speakers. I think there's been some really wonderful insights, so thank you all so much for those. I think for us, it's, like Priya mentioned before, it's a very simple thing to kind of define. Individualized learning to me would be the idea of serving the content that a learner needs in a medium that they engage with and that they learn from best. And I think whilst obviously technology plays a huge component within that, I don't think individualized learning has to be a solely technological endeavor. So I think, yes, we've seen a lot of organizations and schools during the pandemic, upload resources into a VLE or a system like Google Classroom, or, use Microsoft Teams, etc. But a lot of them at the same time have still been delivering live synchronous sessions with students on Zoom, on MS Teams, etc. So it hasn't exactly been that individualized has just been a case of here's the resource, kind of work out what works for you best. And I think really what we need to kind of look at is a lot to do with the intrinsic motivation of learners. I think that's a super powerful piece to really tap into. Yes, we can create experiences that are really engaging. Yes, we can create lovely kind of online games that have a learning message within them, but that's kind of engagement for the sake of engagement. And I think that also boils down the learning to individuals that is kind of a case of, oh, you like this shiny visual, therefore you're going to find this fun. And actually, when we really pair it with that motivation that they have intrinsically, we see the most kind of powerful adoption and the highest engagement. And I think something that we've seen, especially with some of the school partners that we have, is that was coming together, I think, pre-pandemic really wonderfully with the kind of nationwide push for careers and employability training, and obviously with the Gatsby benchmarks and 8 kind of criteria that were laid out to help school leavers leave with employability skills and a real kind of career ready mindset. Obviously the pandemic kind of threw that slightly skew-if, because suddenly it was more important to pivot to some of the core subjects, ensure that they were still able to engage with exams and still kind of complete those assessments. But I think if we're able to take an approach within schools that builds careers into the whole curriculum and the whole learning experience, you'll be able to really tap into that intrinsic motivation. If people understand why they're doing certain things and how that connects with their futures, that's a really powerful piece, because suddenly algebra doesn't become this kind of, why on earth am I doing it? I'm never going to use sin, cos, tan. And excuse me if any math teachers are watching this, because my algebra is terrible. So I'm not sure if that, I think that's along the right lines. But instead, if we show them how, when building properties and when building, different kind of structures, how that links to it and the roles from that, architecture, engineering, etc., and the labour market insights that those are able to provide and the growth in those sectors, and you're going to see real kind of intrinsic motivation. So I think something that we really focus on is that understanding what learners want. We've seen a lot at Upskill Digital, a lot of diagnostic tools, kind of be requested by partners, whether that's within school settings or that's kind of within wider pieces within organizations, but a lot of, kind of training around what does that learner know? What do they want to know? How do they self-assess? But not only that, how do we actually kind of quiz them and see what they know so we can marry the two? Somebody might sit there and go, I know nothing. And actually, when you quiz them, you see it, actually, they do have quite a good competency. So we've seen a lot to do with understanding people's kind of current situation, and then also tapping into that motivation. Why do they want to learn? Where do they want to go? What is an engaging experience from them? And I think we see the most pertinent individualized learning when we're able to build that pathway around the learner. So now we know what they want to do and where they want to go. We can really build the resources, and that could still absolutely be in the form of live synchronous sessions. It doesn't have to solely be online, but the point is the content, the level, the interaction is what suits them and is built with their kind of best interests around them. So I think that's when we see the most kind of pertinent experience. But I think also, to build upon what was mentioned around data and those insights, we've seen a lot, when it comes to the individualized learning piece, of really tapping into data and analytical insights. And I know that can be gained to some degree with the system schools have adopted to house content and deliver training, but really looking at these systems as being new ways of delivering immediate feedback. Kind of gone were the days almost of, I handed in my essay, waited kind of a week for written feedback to come through in the next lesson, etc. Or, oh gosh, something came up, forgot. Easier ways of setting up quizzes with predefined answers so that you can get that immediate impact. Setting up systems that teachers can mark those kind of pieces of work a lot more quickly and a lot more easily, and kind of standardize that approach as well. So we've seen a lot to do with assessments and the insights that can be gained there, but also learners in terms of their time on platforms, their kind of bounce rates, what they're engaging with the most, what has the most views, what has the most completion, ensuring that videos are completed, quizzes are there for comprehension. So I think it's been a real, what we've seen in a long-winded way of saying so, has been a lot to do with that intrinsic motivation to build the individualized pathway, but also leveraging the insights that we can gain through some of the more online asynchronous courses to help build more of a profile and recommend content for learners.
Can I just add one bit? It's just, Priya mentioned this earlier about some people are born to, they have opportunity sort of laid at their feet, or they have, it's there, and then some children have to be educated to see the opportunities. And I completely agree with Henry and that point, that motivation for learners, particularly in kids, is very important. And what we don't see very often is how this can be applied. And to give you an example, I spoke to a school a little while ago and asked them if they could learn anything in the world, what do they want to learn? And they said they want to learn to make computer games. Now, they might have said that because I was in a room, but what they didn't say was coding, because what they gave me was an object and job orientated result. They wanted to know where it was going. And I think particularly the way I've dealt with, I've heard from my daughters and other kids during the pandemic, they're very focused on that motivation and where it can take them. So showing them how they can, evening that playing field, bringing that motivation is really important to individualized learning. It's not just what we saw during pandemic where everything got a little bit, got online, but we still ended up with a hard exam. We still, the education system still went, well, but we've got to get them to pass this exams. We have to find a way. We'll use algorithms, but there's still, we came to that point, and we had an opportunity not to, but it will take a lot longer. But I just, get off my chest.
That's a valid point around that angle and the vision for children. Conscious of time, I want to jump to a section that we mentioned we were going to discuss, is inclusivity and accessibility, because I think it's really important, especially when we talk about individualized learning, there seem to be obvious benefit for inclusivity and accessibility because of the very nature of customizing learning. But actually, how does it apply in real life? And what challenges? Obviously, we're going to have an amazing community of viewers for this event. What should people be aware or wary of when thinking about personalizing learning and making sure it is inclusive and accessible? And probably, Jim, I'll go to you first and open for the rest of the panelists.
Well, there's a stunning opportunity if we properly deliver the sort of individualized learning that, for example, Priya started off that definition question with defining for us. Then, of course, we will end up being able to have more adaptive technology for the individual needs of different people. And two of the things we've seen during the pandemic, one is the digital divide and the basic exclusion of not having either the device or the connectivity or the competence of someone at home to help you, or there's too many siblings at home for you to be able to access what there is, and so on and so forth. And we've still got more work to do on that. And I chair the Digital Poverty Alliance, which is setting out to work with commercial organisations in particular and government to try and help to resolve that initially for children. But beyond that, we also saw that there are, particularly for some forms of neurodiversity, there were some children with particular needs who were really well served by accessing learning online, who really flourished in that sort of environment. And we need to make sure we hang on to that whilst not hanging on to it at the expense of all those that are excluded, if you see what I mean. So we have to realize that individualized learning, wrapping in learning, as I said, around the individual needs, including those with special educational needs and disability. There's a pretty good and strong and rich tradition in our special schools of being able to do that. There they have different teacher-pupil ratios. There's quite an embedded acceptance that there are some adaptive technologies that are really helpful for some children, and you've got to be able to match the right technology to the right children. We can learn from that sector and expand that learning into the whole of the mainstream sector, and thereby, incidentally, include many or all of those SEND children into mainstream establishments, not necessarily in every class, but into establishments. And that would be a great thing for those individuals in terms of their sense of entitlement to the same education as everybody else, and to everybody else understanding the diversity of the people that they grow up with.
That's very very good point. And probably, feel free, all of the panelists, to jump in, but I could see Priya nodding, and yeah.
Well, accessibility and inclusion is huge. If we're talking about maybe accessibility, because these include, some people actually think of these in a very narrow way, and they mean so many different things. 1 in 6 people worldwide have a disability, and so they face exclusion in so many different ways. And EdTech can actually be an amazing tool, not only just in terms of what Jim was pointing out there. There were some students that faced really physical barriers to even going to a classroom, and did do pre-COVID, will do now, and actually it's benefited them to have something at home, even if they were going into school. Just having a technology that can actually pinpoint their needs when they're in a mainstream school, where they might have one special educational needs coordinator and specialist teacher maybe across the entire school, is really, really important, because they deserve that individualized learning just as much as everyone else. Online education is also really important. EdTech's really, really powerful, because you can have a class of students. I remember going into one of our schools in mainstream secondary education, and there was a student with a particular disability, and actually the student fed back that what was really interesting about learning online was that they were equal to everybody online, because online you can't see the disability, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have that, people have that bias towards students where you can see the disability or about it. And so there's all sorts of things that online technology can do, not just in education technology, to actually really help. But I think one of the other points is that education technology can't do everything. There are some students that physically cannot use technology. So it's not, again, it's the whole, it's not a magic bullet. It's not the one size fits all answer. That's why we're trying to solve one size fits all with EdTech, and Century's purpose is that, but also we mustn't assume that it's appropriate for everybody in every single way. But this, this is where innovation is really important. We're investing in EdTech. We're trying to understand what are the nuances, where do we need to focus on in terms of accessibility, right? This is where EdTech can come together and you can build an ecosystem. Companies can work together. You can have companies that really specialize in literacy, others that specialize in certain special needs, others in some physical disabilities, all coming together to try and figure out how to make the digital world so much better for the, for the 1 billion people on the planet that struggle in certain areas. So the opportunity is there to invest in this space. It's incredibly important. And then if we talk about inclusion, I won't go on because everyone will say something, but I mean, again, the pandemic over the last 18 months, you don't really need to look any further than that to be able to see in the UK alone. I think other countries where they were resorted to television, countries in parts of Africa that resorted to education was on TV. You just had to plug into one channel and everyone watched the same thing. The UK also has difficulties. There were children that couldn't be reached. There were children that couldn't access technology. And these are areas that we have to focus on in any sort of policy that the government puts forward in terms of education. And the Department of Education, there's always a struggle on funding, right? That's something that we hear about all the time, and schools really struggle with their funding, and there's always a real need for more, to pay teachers more, all of those sorts of things. But what we also need to do is ensure that we've got that long-term plan and that long-term strategy. And it's the point that I made, I think, a little bit earlier, not to forget what we've seen over the last 18 months, but to think about where do we need to invest now. And the one thing about the UK, I'll just finish on a really positive note, is that there are so many entrepreneurs that are so hungry and desperate and so driven to help. They're not looking at the profit first, they're looking at the social impact, they're looking at how they can affect positive change in education. The UK is the best place for this, right? We have so many of these entrepreneurs, so we have lots of people who are really driven to help. So it's not necessarily about plugging billions into the public sector side of things to try and help here. It's about how can we create clever systems with Treasury to ensure that investment, it's a really, really ripe, fertile land for investment in education technology so that we can try and help some of these problems.
Yes, Jim.
Yes, with apologies to Henry and to Mark for coming back straight away. But the one thing that occurred to me at the beginning of what Priya was just saying that we haven't mentioned is parents. And if you're going to be the expert on any individual child is normally their parent. One of the things that technology, and we've seen this much more in the last 18 months just with parents' evenings alone, but is technology can include parents much more in the learning so that we can sort of square off. So it's not just a bilateral relationship between teacher and learner. The latency of the power of parents as the allies for teachers, really helping to motivate learners at home as well as at school. If they're properly engaged and properly involved and have much more up-to-date information and intelligence about how their child is doing, and they've now seen what their child as a learner looks like through home learning, that's really powerful and exciting too. And that can be truly inclusive because they really get their kids.
I think if I could maybe just jump in on that one, I completely agree, absolutely, with the parents being a real kind of driver of some of this, but I do think there's also a massive need to ensure that parents have the skills and the knowledge to access this themselves. I think absolutely, yes, it's a really exciting opportunity, but it also poses potentially another accessibility issue in itself, because you potentially have parents whose first language might not be English, they might not speak English at home, and therefore if resources are only kind of in one language, there's access issues logging in and getting started if they themselves don't have the equipment within the household. Again, accessibility issues there. So absolutely think that there is that's a really exciting opportunity, but I do think there's a real need also to ensure that there is relevant training that's offered to parents as well, to build those digital skills, to ensure that the systems also include them. And I think that's just something that we have to kind of bear in mind when we talk about accessibility as well.
I think, and again, so as I said, one of the things that we've always been focused on is how to bring the parent back to the screen. I think, and the example I often use is if you ask a child, how was school today? They might go, fine. and that's all you'll get. If you ask a child, how was your chemistry lesson? I heard that there was an accident with a Bunsen burner. You'll hear nothing but that or the drive home. And so it's that shows how empowering a parent with information can get them to engage with their child's learning. And we have seen that through pandemic. Now, it's been incredible. You know, for parents that work full time, it's very hard. As you said, there's a technology barrier. But in terms of empowering parents, there are ways that they can engage. As I said earlier, as long as it's convenient. Yeah, as long as it's like, if I can click on a phone and just say, well, my child's been learning these adjectives, I'm just going to increase the difficulty. And then the kid's playing a game and suddenly that just pops up as achievements. I've got not a hidden educational journey, but I've got an individualized play pattern and journey. So I think, as Priya said, there is so much innovation and thought going into this and gone into this from the private sector, from entrepreneurs, and I talk to them and I hang out with a lot of them. But I think that what we've got is, like, we feel like there isn't a long-term plan. There is the chance that we're racing to try and get back to normal when things did change massively. And I think that we need to sort of seize that opportunity. We need to make noise. Yeah, we did the exam stuff did put us back a little bit, because suddenly everyone stops trusting algorithms, whatever they are, to the public. But it's a real issue right now that if we don't seize on this, and the parent is absolutely part of that. We used to talk about it as in the playground. If a parent hears a teacher talking about something and they bring it home, it gets used. If a group of parents talk about a certain website, then the teacher uses it. There's a symbiosis there in that playground that's really important. And I think that needs to be harnessed. And it does need to be brought to everybody. And that is just an issue that we have to find a way to solve, not something that should, try and prevent us from rolling this out. As entrepreneurs, as everyone here, these are the things we're meant to be tackling.
And it would really help, wouldn't it, Mark, if we had ministers thinking that mobile phones were somewhat more sophisticated as a debate than there being a bad thing. Who at the digital design world is not designing mobile first? And yet, weirdly, you're not supposed to in schools. And yet we're going to engage parents with mobiles. None of this makes sense to me.
No, and it's as someone that, when I was in school, there were no computers. I was there at the beginning of, when they started rolling them out. It's knowing that, like, I've now got in my pocket, in my phone, a computer that was way, that NASA would have been enviable back in the 70s. I'm carrying that around with me, and it's not even a top end phone. So we do have, people are walking around with tech. We have children that are content creators that are making content that they want to watch and they want to see. And I know that opens up another can of worms, but the point is that they are creative. They are hungry to make and get their voice out and listen to other people's voices, and that can be harnessed.
They're all really interesting point. I'm conscious of time and your time and the audience time, and I don't want to be cut off in that amazing session. There's so much learning. I've been writing down plenty of stuff, and a couple of points from our discussion, quite like the idea of providing people, children, teenagers, and adults with the learning experience they deserve, first and foremost. Think about what motivates people to go on to their learning journey. And finally, the point that technology cannot do everything, but it can really support children, teachers, and in the last discussion, parents, which I think is a really good point. Before we log off, just going through quick rounds, is there anything else you would like to add on to that discussion? Anything that you're working on at the moment that people should look out for? Any last word for our audience? And probably starting with you, Priya, and then going around the screen.
Oh, I was dreading you'd ask me first. We're working on a lot of things. Watch this space in the next couple of months. It's really, really exciting. We've been working with educators, which I think is the most important thing. It's putting the ed before the tech. This isn't about retrofitting technology into the education space because it's happening elsewhere. It's about how can we actually finally use this technology, but in a really useful way for the stakeholders that really matter. And I think that's what it's all about. In terms of the final thing, look, whoever's watching this, there's a space for you in education and ed tech. I mean, there is, whether it's just offering opinions, offering feedback, looking at the technology, discovering it. If you're a teacher, you know, try it out. There's space for everybody. It's such an important sector. But otherwise, just thank you very, very much for having me, Elvin, and the rest of the panel. It's been a real joy to contribute today. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. Henry, your final last word.
So yeah, to kind of second what Priya said, thank you first and foremost for having me, and for everyone who's watching as well, and also for the fellow panelists. You've obviously got all such impressive backgrounds and so much to say, so thank you for including me within the discussion. It's been really great. My side, I think from our side, in terms of, you know, some of the things at Upskill that we're doing, we've got a lot that's coming out in the coming weeks and months with some of our key partners. So there's a Bank of Scotland Academy, Lloyd's Academy, resources. So you're going to see a lot of resources that are there for you know, individuals looking to develop their skills, for people who are running micro or small businesses around EMEA. So we've got a lot of initiatives that are going to be launching for them to develop their digital literacy and digital skills so that they can pursue employment and thrive. Like I mentioned at the start, we're doing a skills bootcamp piece with the Department for Education, which is really, really exciting. So we're doing a 4-week program on all things digital, where we look at marketing, we look at web development, UX, etc. So I think for any people who are watching this teacher-wise, and you've got students who have just left school and you're worried about them potentially being neat or potentially sat twiddling their thumbs and looking for an opportunity, please do check that out, because it's something that aims to equip these students not just with the knowledge and the skills, but we put them through live client-facing projects to get them exposure and experience. There's masterclass from some of our key corporate partners. We have an interview guaranteed for them at the end of the scheme as well, and there's accreditation for them to receive. So I think that would be something that I'd say have a look for anybody that you think might be applicable, or if it's something that you're interested in kind of learning from us and running a similar kind of boot camp within your own school, and you want to kind of explore the different resources there. Yes, you know, we're going to be doing quite a lot in carrying on our work with schools and with the staff training that we deliver. So again, if there's, you know, needs for kind of development and CPD, then, you know, we have a lot available there as well. So I would just say, you know, check out the Upskill Digital website, the resources that we have available. We're all easily found on LinkedIn and contactable, so please do reach out. We would be delighted to share any expertise and experience, and to see what we can do to help move the dial when it comes to this digital inclusion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Henry. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, again, I just want to say it's been incredibly humbling to be on this panel, and a privilege. I've early on in the career, I was very engaged in taking part and putting my voice out there, and then we got buried. And so I'm very happy to have been part of this. In terms of what we're up to, we're very much focused on, we've got various experiences that children use their voice to create. So we're about impact, like creating worlds and controlling worlds using the power of speech in order to get them to understand context of language. We've got some various interesting VR experiences that fit very well into the training world, where second screen controlling a world that you're in. So and that ranges from some very interesting training to some very horrifying horror cabins that someone controls. So very different experiences, and all of that sits on a platform that will allow you to change the educational content of the game without actually changing the game. So it gives the parents almost a menu that we've had teachers create for us. So we're in that, we've gone back to that startup innovation phase. We have programmed, but we're trying to take everything we've learned from the last 18 months and apply it to new product and innovation. So that's where we are right now.
Well, I'm assuming we all in the room very much looking forward to seeing the results of that work. It sounds fantastic. Thanks for that, Mark. Finally, Jim, what are your last words for the audience today?
Apart from echoing the thanks, which are, you know, profound, two things really: pedagogy and leadership. We're still, you know, in too many cases, understandably, teachers are just replicating their face-to-face technology online or in the hybrid form. Hybrid's really hard, incidentally, much harder than pure online. And so we've got to do, as a profession, We need much more sharing of the pedagogy that's working with this technology and with the different tools that are available. And TES, and I should mention TES, they do a whole range of things that lots of people know about, but they always do more things than you think TES do. Training is one of the things they're doing really well, beyond initial teacher training, the CPD side as well. But let's get that training properly embedded in our teaching workforce. And that then also goes to leadership, not only leadership training, but we know, and we've always known, for the last 25 years, we've known that technology and education works really well when it's well led. There are very few MATs, for example, that have a chief technology officer or a chief information officer, chief digital officer. That's a gap. Heads really need better advice around how to deploy and what to buy and so on, and what pedagogy to focus on. So we need a big focus on the leadership of technology in education if we're really going to take advantage of what we've got right now, which is a great moment. It's an inflection point.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for all those amazing insights. I know I've been taking notes. I'm pretty sure the audience have been taking notes. Thank you very much to the four of you for joining us today. Priya, Mark, Henry, and Jim. It's really fascinating what we've heard. I love my job for even having the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I hate my job for having to stop the conversation, but unfortunately we're time bound. But I wish we could go on forever. But I'm sure we can keep the conversation going online. People in the audience, if you've got any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. And thank you for just joining us today and watching not only this event, but the whole range of sessions that have been going on through Future of Learning. That was all for us. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.